I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, an old friend, a regular on the site. It's like when I have him on, it's like talking to an old friend. He is a friend of mine, actually. He has Kirby-Analytics.com. He buys and acquires gold by the ton for people. He does a macroeconomic analysis. I'll bring him on. He is Rob Kirby. Rob Kirby, thank you for joining us from Canada.
A pleasure to be with you again, Greg.
My first question to you, and I just said, what am I going to ask? Well, what's going on in the markets? We had this big suck down in the market. We had this big vault up in gold, and then it all turned around. It's all peace, love, and happiness. And Trump's not going to be such a bad president after all. So, what's going on in the markets?
Well, Greg, we don't have markets. We have interventions, and we have we have mass fraud being committed on a daily basis in what we colloquially call our capital markets. But our capital markets really have become really nothing more than a crime scene. So that's really the long and the short of it. And this was illustrated very, very clearly if you were paying attention to the detail on election night, as it became very clear that Hillary was not going to win the election, and indeed Trump was going to win the election. The markets immediately reacted. The Dow Jones futures were down over 800 points. Gold was up $70. But then, lo and behold, the market manipulators, or the adjunct to the U.S. Treasury, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, some people would refer to them as the plunge protection team, they punched their cards and went to work. And over the ensuing 24 hours, they sold the equivalent of 2.5 years worth of global gold production into the paper markets to clobber the price of gold back down to manageable levels. And they went to work buying the stock index futures to goose turn an 800 point down to a 261 point up by the end of trading on Wednesday. So these were completely and utterly manufactured results. The hand of the managers of our all things financial was clearly at play, and to boot, I would say that this kind of activity, and it might sound a little bit like a broken record, but this is not sustainable stuff in the long run. There's no doubt in my mind we will see a collapse, but my feeling is that the timing isn't right for the collapse yet. And in saying that, I think what I'm really alluding to here is that they're very likely going to try and make things look like they're somewhat normal until Obama exits office. Obama is a globalist. The globalists control what we call markets, and the globalists aren't going to allow them to collapse until a non or an unfriendly person to the globalists assumes the reins of power. At which point I would say there's a very, very, very strong chance that we will see the collapse, and big time.
So why number one, I find it very odd that the press doesn't even comment. I mean, that's an awful big dump. The people in the press might just ask, who has 2.5 years of production? What is that, 5,000 tons? I mean, how much is that?
I think the amount was roughly 8,000 metric tons were sold, from late election night through to Friday. The number was around 8,000. It's almost up in the area of 3 years of global production of gold being sold into paper markets in a space of 3 days.
Who has that the press doesn't even ask. Let's see, who has 8,000 tons of gold to sell? Well, that'd be nobody. Wouldn't that be nobody?
It doesn't exist. It's not for sale. Not for sale anywhere. And the reality, Greg, if somebody actually had 8,000 tons of gold to sell, and it was transparent and people knew it was for sale, I would suggest to you that very, very serious players in the world, if somebody could actually show them a real amount of 8,000 metric tons of gold, they would actually pay a premium for it.
I mean, that is the entire, supposedly, holding of the U.S. government, 8.2 thousand tons of metric tons of gold. Isn't that what the U.S. claims it has? That's the entire holdings of the U.S. government. That just to give people size reference to how much got dumped on the market. It's staggering. It's an unbelievable amount.
Well, yeah, you're right. It's an unbelievable amount. It's the old saying: if something's too good to be true, it usually isn't true. And this is just too big a story, really, to believe that there exists 8,000 tons worth of gold to sell, and because there clearly isn't.
Well, nobody even on the mainstream press brings this up, which I think is a stunning story. I mean, as a reporter, I say, wow, somebody sold 8,000 tons of gold. Who was that? But not a word. Just, oh, well, gold took a hit. I mean, just like it was some organic market.
Let's put it this way, Greg. If a very serious player wanted to buy 200 metric tons of gold right now, I don't believe they would find it anywhere in the world. It's not for sale. So if 200 tons isn't for sale, how can you justify the selling of 8,000 metric tons in 3 days, into the open markets? And so what that leads us to next, Greg, is who's regulating these markets, and are the regulators complicit in this fraud? And they are. That's the answer. They are complicit, and because you see the price of gold has to be managed, because if the price of gold isn't managed, and if it rises too quickly, it's like the government or the managers of our financial system getting a failing grade on their report card, and they don't like to have failing grades on their report card, because when the managers of our financial edifice get failing grades on the report card, that's when currencies get undermined and currencies can go bye-bye. And that's exactly what ultimately will happen with the US dollar. The stewards of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency have done an extremely poor job. And they're actually in a position now where they're acting out of desperation to try and make things look and appear normal. But things aren't normal. Things aren't normal at all. As a $70 up in an hour, $70 up in the price of gold, and then to have it slammed to the mats and have it down $60 is just reeks of interference by officialdom. It reeks of it.
Well, I got another take on that. They sold 8,000 tons of gold, and they could only get it to go down in the 1220 range. I mean, that's got to freak them out. I mean, 8,000 tons of gold, and they could only drive it down 60, 70, 80 bucks, whatever they ended up driving it down. That's it. And what does that tell you about the gold market? I mean, isn't that the really way to look at it? They had that much intervention, they can only drive it down less than 100 bucks.
Yeah, I mean, it's you hit the nail right on the head, and the reality is, Greg, gold is money, and gold is scarce, and gold never goes away. So fiat currencies come and go. Gold never goes away. Gold has never gone to zero. Fiat currencies all go to zero, because it's in the very design of fiat money. All fiat money ultimately achieves its true intrinsic value, which is zero. And the US dollar will be no different. And we have a bunch of Keynesian-minded people running the Federal Reserve and who occupy the U.S. Treasury, who are trying to make us believe that a dollar backed by nothing is actually worth something. And that's a charade that only lasts so long.
I know you do macroeconomic analysis, but you also have some great context. Before we get into your analysis, I want to talk about the Treasury bond market, which yields are up over 2.2%. And I mean, that was what they were this time last year, basically. So, but I want to ask about your well, let's talk about yields. Your macroeconomic analysis. I mean, the bond market in July was, I don't know, 145, and late June 145, 150, and now it's at 223 or something. What's going on in the bond market? Couldn't that destabilize the whole thing? I thought they were trying to hold rates down, but it looks like they're rising, and pretty dramatically in the last 6 months.
Well, yeah, we've seen the 10-year yield go from sub 150 to 220, I think it is this morning, which on a percentage basis is a very, very, very big move. And where this could have the biggest impact, in theory, would be in the derivatives books of some of the large institutions that have, let's just say, books in the $50 trillion notional range. And these institutions would be the likes of Citibank, JP Morgan, a Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and a Goldman Sachs. If these guys were to get wrong-footed with or get caught with their pants down with a pant load of bonds, with the kind of volatility we've seen or backup we've seen in rates recently, that could be extremely toxic in terms of what it could do to or impact their bottom line. But you see, that assumes, Greg, that they're actually forced to mark their bonds to market, and they're actually subject to accounting. And because I've explained in the past that the U.S. has the ability to grant companies, a waiver from reporting their true financial condition if it's deemed to be in the interest of national security. And I would suggest to you that the state of the dollar, the state of the dollar, and the state of the U.S. government debt market would certainly be an item that would be considered in national security. And you certainly wouldn't want to have things like accounting getting in the way of banks being able to consume or take up the slack of foreigners who've been selling tremendous amounts of U.S. government securities over the last number of months. So, isn't it interesting? And I'd like to point this out specifically. Isn't it interesting that Deutsche Bank has been reported to be under extreme pressure, and most people, when they talk about Deutsche Bank's troubles, they tend to mention the size of their derivatives book in the same breath. Well, I'm going to tell anybody who wants to listen that Morgan's book and Citibank's book and Bank of America's book of derivatives contains the exact same stuff that Deutsche Bank's book has. So if Deutsche Bank is in trouble, then technically the American banks with the same size derivatives books should also be in trouble. But the real difference, though, is who they report to. And Deutsche Bank reports to a German regulator called BaFin. And BaFin does not view Deutsche Bank's job in life is to be the supporter or the progenitor of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. And as such, they'd be horrified if they looked into their book and saw that's what they were up to. That actually happened. In the case of the U.S. banks, they report to the Federal Reserve, or they're under the purview of the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is very, very much interested in seeing the perpetuation of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. And as such, leeway is given, and regulators in America tend to look the other way instead of holding their feet to the fire, with let's just say accounting. So, that's the difference. It's who you report to, not exactly what you have on your books or off books.
Well, you and Bill Gross had the same thing. You talked about a dollar supernova, and he talked about a bond supernova. Are you surprised at how long this has taken? How they put this off? Because the debt has doubled just under the Obama AGS. Of course, that's with the help of the Republicans too. I mean, it's not all his fault. But so the debt in America has doubled, and yet everybody acts like we're going to pay all this back, which we are not. I mean, what do you think about how they've stretched this out, and how much longer can they stretch it out? And are we going to get a dollar supernova, or as Bill Gross says, a bond supernova?
Well, we could and should and likely will have both, and my gut tells me that we're very, very close to both occurring. But the reason it hasn't happened yet, Greg, is because effectively, if you remove the constraints of accounting from financial institutions, which there's no doubt in my mind that this has been in play, whether it's in play today or whether it was in play last week, I certainly know that it was in play back in the 2008 timeframe. And with the ascension of Donald Trump to the presidency, who is clearly anti-globalist and a nationalist and with widespread populist support, I would say that the globalists who are in control of the financial edifice would very likely be wanting now to use this as a trigger or as a good excuse in the spirit of not letting a good crisis go to waste. And those are the famous words uttered by President Obama's first chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel. He said, "You would never want to let a good crisis go to waste because it allows you to do things you thought you could never do before." And if that isn't verbatim what he said, it certainly captures the intent and the message that he was trying to convey. The globalist operators, which have infested both the mainline DNC and RNC, are infested with globalists. The central bank in the United States, the Federal Reserve, is literally the backbone of the globalist system. And the globalists right now are acting in crisis mode. So, paying heed to the Emmanuelism of never letting a good crisis go to waste, it wouldn't shock me at all if what these people have in store for us, the globalists who have contempt for humanity, would be to let our markets absolutely sewer the minute Donald Trump is sworn in, if he lives that long. So that's kind of sort of where I think we're headed, and the plans may be hastened. Let's just remember that the Electoral College doesn't vote or cast their votes until the 19th of December. If anything were to happen to President-elect Trump between now and December 19th, the electors would not be bound to vote for his vice presidential pick, Pence. So the electors would be free if anything were to happen to Trump, and to say it, very clearly, if he was assassinated between now and the 19th of December, the electors in the Electoral College would be free to vote their conscience, on the election, which means you could still get a Hillary presidency, and wouldn't that just be something? What an end to this story that would be. Oh my goodness.
Full on, we'd get an economic collapse, and I've been telling people on full on tyranny to go with it. At least this way we don't get the tyranny. I hope.
Well, or a world war.
Oh yeah, that's right. Or a world war. How is it crazy? I never could figure this. How is it crazy for somebody to stand on the stage, Trump, and say, "I don't believe in a first strike"? But that's crazy. But Hillary, she sure does. But that's not crazy. A nuclear first strike. I just don't understand that. I understand that. I'm with Trump on the not having a first nuclear strike. I like that posture better. I digress. I wanted to get to your contacts. You have global contacts. You not only do you do macroeconomic analysis, but you also have some fantastic contacts all over the world, where you try to acquire gold for people by the ton. You don't buy coins, you buy tonnage. So what are your, after all this hubbub and the big spike up in gold and all this dumping of, almost 3 years of production onto the market, and then this big takedown, what are your clients saying about gold? Are they nervous about holding gold? Or are they buy, or are they sell?
Basically, we can't get enough of the stuff. And it's becoming harder and harder and harder as time goes along to source meaningful amounts of physical bullion. So that's been a constant, and people who are long-term players are certainly not turning away from gold, not in the slightest, Greg.
And what are they telling you? And you're on the phone to them and stuff like that. Any comments you can share with us about what their thoughts are about the timing, or about what their feelings are about what's going on?
I'm going to just say everybody seems to be on edge. I've never seen people more on edge, and I've never seen as much fatigue as I'm seeing right now. Because it seems to just be. With these rude market interventions, people are just getting very sick of seeing, what to serious market observers to see these interventions continue with no comment from the peanut gallery. Our mainstream press, which is also infested with globalists, and they've completely and utterly sold their souls to the I'm going to say to the devil, because I think there's a lot of Satanism embedded in this globalist movement also. People are getting very, very sick and tired of watching what goes on in our capital markets on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of resentment, and it's growing. And on a political level, I think that's you can probably equate that to the rise of populism, and the rise of populism is growing, and this is why people, Greg, are also turning to the alternative media. The conduct of the mainstream media through this electoral cycle has absolutely destroyed any credibility that they might have had, prior to the this election cycle. And to see how completely and utterly shill and in the tank our mainstream press was for Hillary Clinton shows, I think, and has made new believers out of skeptics regarding the alternative press. Has just absolutely cemented the notion that our mainstream financial press and news media are bought and paid for and irrelevant. And they've literally brought it all on themselves by their lack of objective reporting and investigative journalism. But you know too much about that to get off on a tangent.
Well, I think, Rob, I've said this many times. I think they committed fraud, especially people, companies like GCI, Gannett, USA Today, the newspaper side of it. I mean, I think they committed fraud on shareholders and fraud on the public. New York Times, they're saying, "Oh, we're gonna do things right. Write this big op-ed, this big letter to everybody. We're gonna go back to fair reporter." And then at the end, they say, "But we covered the candidates fairly." It's like Bad Gag Bob. I mean, it's just lying. I mean, it's unbelievable. I think they committed fraud on the public and fraud on shareholders. Really,
sure. And you see, and you would think that the election result might have made them sit up and take notice and maybe change their tune, but that hasn't happened either. Because these same mainstream media outlets, Greg, are trying to tell us that these post-election demonstrations, anti-Trump demonstrations being held in big cities, are all spontaneous grassroots uprisings. And I mean, it's just amazing because it was Zero Hedge, I believe, that published an article. It was either yesterday or the day before, and they're highlighting 5 blocks lineup 5 blocks long of buses. With Wisconsin license plates, where they bust people in and paid people to go and demonstrate in Chicago. 5 blocks long, a line of buses with the people that they've imported and paid to create havoc. And from there, I would say that the organization of these anti-Trump protests certainly involved the DNC. Very likely involve the Obama White House, and these are very planned and staged events, and it makes a mockery. It makes a mockery of President Obama when he goes on television nationwide and says that he's trying to facilitate a smooth transition between his administration to the incoming Trump administration, and when he says that, we want this to be smooth because if America, if it goes smooth, America benefits. They're doing everything in their power to make the opposite happen. You see, I judge people by their actions, not by their words, and the actions speak louder than his words, and his actions make his words to be that of a liar. He's lying to the American public. He's telling the American public he's trying to do right by them, and he's doing the opposite. They are planning insurrection. They're funding people who want to burn American cities to the ground. This is a reality. Wake up, America. You've been sold out by your leadership. It's a shame. Trump's going to try and remedy it. I don't know if he's going to succeed. I don't even know if he's going to be a good president. But he's not a globalist, and he doesn't have contempt for you like your current leadership.
One last thing about the the timing of the collapse, which you think is a deadlock cinch. I mean, you've said that in the past. I'm surprised at how long they've kept this going. But any of these well, I don't know, let's call them gray swans. An interest rate spike, the bond market is spiking. You know all about derivatives. You're an expert in derivatives. I forgot to say that to everybody. When you bring up derivatives, you're an expert. I mean, you were around when they invented derivatives. You were on the cutting edge of inventing derivative type products in Canada for a big bank. The Italian banks could go under. I mean, DB, Deutsche Bank could go under. We'd have a big interest rate spike. There's all kinds of things that could go wrong that could accelerate this thing. Would you think the heart of the problem would be the derivatives? That's what would sink all these, what could cause a daisy chain of default or sink these banks? Is it the derivative complex? And why?
Well, if banks were subject to accounting, it would have happened already. But the fact that it hasn't happened already tells me anyway, that banks are not subject to accounting at times. And derivatives have been used without a doubt to recapitalize banks via stealth in the past. It can be done again. And my gut tells me that now that we see a change in the leadership in America, the globalists who control the levers in the financial system very likely are going to pull them once Trump gets in power.
So we have a very short shelf life from collapse. I mean, you're thinking that
I believe
sometime in the next few months you think that they're gonna kick over the table and game over.
Well, let's put it this way, Greg. In my life and in my view, globalists are responsible, or were responsible, for 9/11. Globalists were responsible for wars in Libya. All the color revolutions through the Middle East and through Africa. All globalists run. Globalists like the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation. These are things, let's take 9/11. I mean, Trump has said he's going to reopen the 9/11 investigation. I mean, that was a news article on the weekend. He's going to reopen the 9/11 investigation. I think there's a very good chance that the Clinton Foundation is going to be investigated. Likely there'd be a grand jury on that. And it's very likely that if, as and when that happens, it's very likely that the Obama administration is going to be dragged into that as well. And I mean, the import of all these things that Trump has stated he's going to do, which I believe he will, because if he doesn't, I think he's going to lose his base. And the prospect of these things occurring, in my view, will not be acceptable to the globalists, who still control too much of the apparatus.
So they'll crash it.
They're going to crash it, and they're going to blame everything on the crash, and they'll try to pin it all on Trump, that he's the reason why it crashed. You see, and this way they can hopefully, in their minds, try to get rid of Trump. And you know what? If Americans' 401ks go to Zool, Greg, Americans will fall into line, and they'll want someone to blame. And if the globalists blame Trump, it will be off with his head. So the globalists are going to go to extreme lengths to neutralize Trump and to get somebody who's a lot more compliant in the office of the president. So that's what I see coming in very short order here.
Well, spoiler alert, if you read the Bible, they lose. But they do a lot of damage. And with that, Rob Kirby, Kirby-Analytics.com, you have a subscription to your site. You do one-on-one email contact with people. It's $145 a year. I will put up all the links for that. Make sure that I put that for you guys. For you guys who are on YouTube, just go up to the right through, and you can click back to the story page, which I have after the interview. I have Rob Kirby on there. Rob Kirby, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you have one-on-one email contact with your subscribers, correct?
Yes.
Well, listen, I love what you do. You're a great talent. Thank you for coming on and sharing your macroeconomic analysis on usawatchdog.com. Thank you very much, sir.
Pleasure being with you, Greg.